Hi, I am Franklin Cohen, and this is Living the Classical Life.
Frank, it's such a pleasure to have you on the show. I've been trying to get you here for a long time, and it's hard to even give you a proper introduction because you're a musician in so many different capacities, and you've done so many things in your very storied life. You're an orchestral musician. You've been with the Cleveland Orchestra for almost 40 years. And you're a chamber musician, you're a soloist, you're a teacher, and now together with your daughter Diana, you've founded Chamberfest Cleveland. Thank you so much for being on.
Thank you. You're such a dear friend. This is a real privilege for me. I get to see you as we walk around the lakes with the dogs, but this is really special.
So tell me, Frank, where did you grow up and what was your family like?
I grew up in a suburban community of New York, White Plains, New York, which is about 30 miles north of the city. And my family was a very typical family of the day. My father worked from sunup to sundown as a lawyer. And my mom was an amateur pianist who taught neighborhood kids how to play the piano, or tried at least. And she practiced nonstop. And to that, I attribute my love for music at an early age. I sort of woke up listening to her play. I went to sleep and she'd be playing all the great works for small hands, because my mom was a petite woman. I fell in, it was a love affair that started when I was probably 6 or 7 and has continued through today.
So how did you find your way to the clarinet? Why the clarinet?
Well, it probably found its way to me, actually. I began my early childhood studying with my mom. And studying with a parent can at times be a little testing. But, I thought it was too close. I probably didn't realize how much incredible music there was for the piano at the time. I probably would have continued. When I gave up the piano officially, my mom took me to a music store, and the salesman marched out about 6 instruments, and by the end of the day, I think the only one I was able to get a squeak out of was the clarinet. So we took that home, and that's been the instrument that I didn't really actively choose, but it chose me because it made a sound when I needed it to.
And what was your early music education? Who were your first teachers?
I studied clarinet with a school teacher who knew nothing about the instrument and ended up playing with hands opposite. Instead of this way, I played that way for a few years until I couldn't reach a few of the keys that I needed to. And after maybe 2 or 3 years of that, we found kind of a local clarinet teacher that, no, this is a great story. My mom found a German man. He was an immigrant, came over before the war. His name was Aaron Gerodner, and he lived way out on Long Island, which was about an hour from our home. And my mom found him through a conservatory in Manhattan called the Turtle Bay Music School. Have you ever heard of it?
No.
Nor have I since. But anyway, so she called Mr. Gerodner, and he said to my mother, I can come up, but I need 3 or 4 lessons to teach to make it worth my while. So my brother started studying clarinet, and we found a few friends who were willing to start clarinet. Anyway, we studied with Mr. Gerodner for a few years. When I came to Cleveland many years later, I found a book I think it was in the Zell Library, listing all of the principal players in the history of the Cleveland Orchestra. And lo and behold, this man, Aaron Gerodner, for 1 year was principal clarinet of the Cleveland Orchestra in the late 30s, I think.
That's amazing.
If I had known.
Wow.
When I think about that, it almost brings chills to me because, I didn't know anything about what the Cleveland Orchestra was at the time. I didn't know that it was one of the great orchestras of the world, and this man, I didn't know he was even good. I had not that much appreciation yet. But he did love music, and he just reinforced what I got at home.
At what point did you you went to Juilliard, right?
I did.
Yes.
Yeah.
And what was the impact of Juilliard on your musical life?
Well, I think the best thing about being at Juilliard for me were all of my colleagues, the students that I met who were my age and got to play with. I would say I didn't have extraordinary lessons at that point,
Mm-hmm.
but the people I played with and some of the coaches, I remember one man in particular, Oskar Shumsky, who was a violinist, a very famous violinist, but never a commercially successful violinist. He was one of the teachers at Juilliard as well as Curtis. And he took me aside after I was assigned a group in his class and said, "You're really good. You are really good. And I want you to come to this festival that I direct in the summer." So I ended up following Shumsky to this festival. And some of the people that were there, well, Jean-Pierre Rampal was there. I was a 19-year-old kid, and I'm playing chamber music with Jean-Pierre Rampal and Ray Still, who was the then principal oboe of the Chicago Symphony. So this Mr. Shumsky really went on a limb for me as a young kid, because I could have been a colossal failure for him at his festival. Luckily, I don't think I was, and things worked out, and I developed friendships with these then famous musicians, and of course learned so much from that experience.
And Frank, one of the most famous musicians you had an early encounter with was Leopold Stokowski, one of the most famous American conductors, or conductors on the American scene,
Right.
I should say. At what point did you meet Stokowski, and what was his influence on your development or career?
Well, at that time, I loved orchestral music, but I didn't really think I would want to make my life playing in an orchestra. However, I had not been chosen yet to play in the Juilliard Orchestra. The audition process had passed me by. And I did love the music, so I called the American Symphony, where he was the music director, and asked if there was a possibility to audition for Stokowski. And I was told yes. Actually, he's looking for a principal clarinet for the next season, and I could come to his Fifth Avenue apartment, which was overlooking Central Park, this magnificent apartment. And Stokowski, I'm ushered in. He comes down the hallway, very imposing, and
Were you scared?
I was very scared. Not because I was afraid to play, just the man. I had heard about him. And I played for him for about a half an hour. He said, "I love the way you play. I want you to be my principal clarinet." And I told him, I said, "I've never played in an orchestra before." He says, "No problem. I'm not worried. You'll be just fine." And so that was the beginning of my connection with orchestral life, as it were.
And so what happened when you started playing for him?
Well, at the first rehearsal, we were playing a program which was very full of big clarinet solos, and I didn't know any of these well. I had gotten the music a few days ahead of time and was a little bit frightened because everyone else on stage seemed to be very experienced, and was somewhat hesitant in entrances and looking at him a lot, making sure I was okay. And he summoned me backstage at the intermission and said, "Frank, do you remember the way you played for me in my apartment?" I said, "Yeah." He says, "You need to play that way." He says, "Don't worry about what I think." He says, "Who cares what I think? You're the player. You're a wonderful musician. Just give me what's natural and go for it." And he said, "A person who has your musical instincts will never be happy following someone else's lead." So I took that advice, and it actually held me in pretty good stead for many years. I've always felt to be in an orchestra is to be part of a team, which is true, and I believe I'm a good team player. But when your moment comes, it's not about them, it's about you. You express yourself, and if whoever's up there doesn't like it, they'll tell you. But I've never looked there for guidance, for musical guidance. I remembered what Stokey, as I'll call him, said, just do your thing. If you give me something from your heart, I'm going to love it. That's what he told me.
Did that advice stick with you for the rest of your life?
It did.
Is that something that helps you when you get nervous on stage? Do you get nervous on stage?
Not really. I mean, maybe occasionally, but as a rule, not.
Yeah.
I believe one of my greatest gift is probably not playing the instrument. It's more being able to immerse myself in the music at the moment.
Yeah.
I think that's my greatest gift. And I kind of forget about the other stuff that makes some people nervous. You know? I mean, if I miss something and I'm trying to get something special, it doesn't matter. I've always felt that way.
Can you tell us something about the instruments that you play on? I believe you have 2 of them.
I probably have 30 or 40 of them.
My goodness.
I brought 2 here today. Yeah. But one has to own a B flat and A clarinet for orchestral work. And I own, as I said, many instruments. But
is that unusual?
It's probably unusual. I've been given instruments over the years by instrument companies. If I had to pay for all of them, I probably wouldn't own all of these. But I've always, sort of keep my ear open for something that could give me a little different look at how a clarinet should sound. But I seem to always go back to the old instruments that were made in the 60s, 70s. I like the old wood sound.
Yeah. And what is it about that? Do you feel like that sound resonates with your musical voice more? The older designs also had some acoustical and tuning issues that some of the newer instruments don't have. But the wood, maybe that they made them from, and the fact that I look for older instruments, they've been aging for years, actually, by the time I play it. I've had very little luck choosing a brand new instrument and loving it. I don't know if that makes any sense. Absolutely. So take me back to the age of when you were 22, you won the Munich International Competition, the same year that Jesse Norman won it. 22 is a very early age to find such huge success. Were you emotionally ready for that success, and what happened after that?
Well, I didn't go to this competition to win as such. I just loved playing, and I looked for opportunities to play. And there was an announcement at school. Oh, Munich competition. That means I get to go to Germany and Europe. That looks like fun. I didn't say, okay, I'm going to train like a biathlete and win a first prize. But I went to have a great time, which of course I did, because if you win, it's always more
it's a little more fun.
A more fun time than if you don't. But that probably wouldn't have mattered. I went, I played, and my talent, my hard work, my gift, if there's a lack of another word to use, was recognized by a larger group of people. And of course that feels good. And what it represented for me was an opportunity to have an audience throughout Germany. I was able to get a management and start playing concerts. This was all very new to me, and I probably was too young to really realize what it really meant at the time. Looking at it from today's eyes, it would have been overwhelming, this opportunity. But in those days, I just figured, oh, cool. I'm going to go to Germany and play, and these people seem to like it, and how lucky am I?
So you had some tours after the competition win, some concerts?
Yeah, a lot of concerts. I was taken on by this very large management, and when I looked at his artist list, it was very humbling. Isaac Stern,
My goodness.
It's Perlman, Fischer D-Scale, all the names that I had seen on record jackets, And here I was, Franklin Cohen, this guy, this young student from New York. And as I said before, I didn't know what it really represented, how it would sort of catapult me to the next level.
Right.
And then as you reach another level, of course, then you want to produce more. So I started working actually a lot harder once I got that prize.
How did you find your way to the Cleveland Orchestra?
How did I find my way? It's a long story, but I was contemplating a solo career to last indefinitely in Europe.
Was that your dream, to be a soloist?
At the time, it became a dream. But for reasons, for family reasons and personal reasons, I made the decision that I would live in the U.S. primarily rather than Germany.
Right.
And basically came back and told my management I would not be available anymore, because as soon as I came back, I got my first full-time orchestra job, which was in the Baltimore Symphony.
Oh, I didn't know that.
No, and I went there, and oddly enough, I stayed for 5 years. The Baltimore Symphony was a fine orchestra, but I was very unhappy there because I was leading this very glamorous life as a soloist, and then I go to Baltimore, and I had a crummy place to live, and most of the concerts were pops or runouts or children's concerts, which are fine, but it was such a different life and very little glamour compared to what I had done before. And so after toughing it out for 5 years, my wife said to me, by that time I had met my wife Lynette, we married, and she said, well, let's go back to Europe. I'll go with you, and you can try to sort of start up where you ended, before you came back. And at that time, the Cleveland Orchestra position opened up. We had one foot on the plane, so to speak, to Europe, and I came here and auditioned for Lauren Moselle and was offered this job. And
how old were you at that time?
I was 29. So as a kid, my brother, who was an avid music fan, bought all of the Cleveland Orchestra records, with Zell, and I knew how great the orchestra's reputation was. There was a very big article, I think, in the New Yorker magazine talking about Cleveland, the greatest orchestra in the world, and I thought, wow, maybe I should try it. Well, 39 years later. Here we sit. I've had a long and very happy career here, and the hallmark of it for me, in addition to playing in the group, was that they allowed me from the very beginning and encouraged me to solo every season.
You've soloed over 200 times, as I understand it, which is more than any other instrumentalist has had a chance to play.
It's true. I don't know. I honestly, I look at the performances and the pieces I play, it's like, oh my God, where did all those years go? But yes, I wanted to play, and they encouraged me to, and it's worked out. It somehow worked out.
So when you got your job at the Cleveland Orchestra, did you feel like you were set for life with your musical career on firm footing?
Well, career is a funny word for me. I never saw music as a career.
Oh,
yeah. If I had been a lawyer, although my father, to be honest, what I saw was a passion for what he did. I don't know if, I didn't feel like, my mom played piano, it wasn't a career.
Right. Teaching
the kids, locally was probably a little bit of a come down for her. But my father did what he loved. And I always did what I loved. I read an article yesterday talking about the problem with the American system, and that too many parents say, well, find your passion, and how this leads a lot of people down the road to sort of being lost. But for me, it was very clear. I had to be a musician. I didn't, I ended up, one could say, having a very successful career so far, but career was never important to me, or winning auditions or winning competitions wasn't important, even though I was lucky enough to have done those things.
Having played in the orchestra for as many years as you have, would you say that the sound of the orchestra has influenced your own personal sound or your philosophy of music making?
I would say, of course, that must be true. I think in some ways, I like to believe, Joel, and I don't think it's egocentric, that I learned so much from playing in the orchestra in I came in 76. This was basically the George Sell Orchestra. And it was an ensemble of incredible standard in every way. The balances, the intonation, everyone played so musically, and as a young person coming into this rarefied atmosphere, of course, I knew what I had to do to fit into it. I heard it immediately, and I made those adjustments. And yes, to answer your question, as I made these adjustments, I felt like my playing was getting better. But I also like to feel, as I said, this is not an egocentric part of me, but I also want to feel ultimately that what I brought to the ensemble also affected the way it played. Because I sit in the exact center of the stage. And Mr. Doknani, our last music director, used to say, Frank, do this, keep doing what you're doing, or I love the way your energy is picked up by these people, and I feel it. It's like a team. When one person hits a home run or does something special, it permeates the whole atmosphere of the dugout and the field. And I think an orchestra is very much that way. And I did experience this in that, especially the old orchestra. Most of the players had been trained by Zell, auditioned by him, and it was so perfect in every way, musically, technically, ensembly. Just something I'd never heard on recordings before, unless I listened to the Cleveland Orchestra.
You talked about the fact that you've worked under many conductors. What happens when you don't get along with one of them?
Well, we are a team, so I think that as strong as one's feelings are, not to forget that you are a member of, in case of an orchestra, a 100-person team, and what you do needs to support that effort, no matter what. But the great lesson back to Stokowski is also be yourself. Don't ever give yourself up in trying to do everything for the team. Do whatever you can for the team, but be yourself, because the stage needs every individual presence. And the more characters we have, so to speak, I think it's a good thing.
Your daughter Diana and your son Alex are both extraordinary musicians, and they're both playing in the same orchestra. I'm curious, having now raised a musical family, is there anything that you learned from the both of them that influenced you musically?
Of course. There's one expression I heard years ago. It has nothing to do with music, but it says, senility is not being able to learn from your children. So I've always been very careful that I remain flexible, and if my kids have something to say, I really listen to it. And I think if I want honest criticism, and I love criticism, not constant criticism, but I know I can get it from either one of them. They're both wonderful musicians. I would say world-class musicians, in other words, ears that hear everything. It doesn't mean that they are the most famous, timpanist or violinist, but they hear on the level of some of the finer musicians I've ever known. And so I know I can go to them to ask them, or sometimes they just volunteer information, which I find very useful, although occasionally my defenses are perked in the beginning. I try not to be too defensive, because I want to hear about what people think from my offering, as a musician, technically, musically. And so, yes, I continue to learn from them as they do from me. We all trust each other. And I think any situation where there's mutual trust, there's a lot to be learned from others. family and non-family.
You talked about being comfortable in front of audiences. You've been involved in recordings with the orchestra that later won Grammys. Are you also equally comfortable in the recording studio?
That's a curious question, because I haven't really sought out many opportunities to make that many recordings as a solo clarinetist. The ones that were presented to me through the orchestra, I gladly did. But I'm the kind of person, my good old friend Vladimir Ashkenazy, when I was complaining about the way I sounded one day, he said, Frank, he said, this is not for you. This is for others. They should hear you. And he said, you know, like you, no, I don't like to look at myself in the mirror either. And I think it's a great analogy. So I'm not the kind of person that stands in front of the mirror, you know, thinking how beautiful I am. And as a player, I never really felt like I needed to make a recording so that I could see the recording and feel, I made a recording. I've made some, but you know, my kids now say to me, Dad, why don't you, whatever time left you have, you know, as a player, make some recordings, because others want to hear you, you know? And I didn't do it because I felt like it was not easy to look at myself in the mirror. I'm very critical of myself. A story about that. I came in the house one day. My daughter Diana had a CD playing, and I thought, wow, this is really beautiful. I said, who is this? And she said, I'm not going to tell you. I said, why not? She says, because if I do, you won't like it anymore. So I said, is it me? She said, yes. And then I said, you're right. I don't like it anymore. You know, it's funny how that is. Do you ever feel that way?
All the time.
You know, you like it until you know it's you.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. Do you have a favorite musical memory as such?
Yes, I do. Actually, I have many, but this one stands out. There's been a family that I've known for many, many years here, and they had 4 children, this couple. And since the kids were very young, the father would take them to every concert. And so each time I was soloist, I'd walk to the middle of the stage, and at first it was the 3 kids sitting there. And then as another child came along, it was the 4 kids sitting there, all dressed up, and all looking at me, and I kind of waving secretly, and I kind of waved back. And that was so special, because I saw these kids grow up through a performer's perspective from the front row of the stage. and we're very close. When I see them, it's like talking to my own kids. It's a very beautiful feeling, actually, watching children grow in that sort of context, and also your friends age along with you in that context, from an audience context. I've been here 40 years. I've seen people go from 30 years old to 70, or 40 years old to 80, or many disappear.
Yeah.
And I'm older. So, I mean, it's been like a whole kind of my musical relationship that I actually really cherish. And that part of my life I will miss the most, seeing the people who frequent Severance Hall. I'll probably see them at the bakery, you know,
yeah,
like like everyone else. But I'm
and you're talking now about leaving the Cleveland Orchestra.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. So I'll miss these people, seeing them on a regular basis. But that relationship I've had with the audience, and I don't really believe it would have been possible in any other city that I know, because Cleveland is a small town. And I've had unusual opportunities to get to know people through my music, and to grow my family, if you will. I feel like my family now is hundreds, if not thousands, of people that I really enjoy seeing, that enjoy seeing me, and I probably will stay in Cleveland for that reason, as well as Chamberfest.
Tell me a little bit about Chamberfest.
About 5 years ago, my daughter Diana, who you know, is a wonderful violinist, and she came to me one night looking very serious, and she said, "Dad, I think we should start a music festival. I'm saying, like, you got to be kidding me. I worked so hard. I'm going to now take that on. And, you know, when your child asks you to do something with them as a partnership, how can you say no? You know, you can't. And I'm glad I couldn't, because it's been a wonderful new chapter in my life, in her life, and I think in the lives of many music lovers in the Cleveland area. As you know, chamber music is very different from orchestral music. Mm-hmm. And we play in small places and with small groups of people. And so now, going from this family of hundreds, thousands of people that I've had in Severance Hall, so it's a much smaller family, but more intimate, more like a real family.
Yeah.
You know, every concert you see the same people afterwards, and it gets to be, you know them very, very well, and that kind of relationship, which I talked about before, is a privilege, to play for people who know you so well. You know, playing for a stranger is easier, in that you never get nervous, like, oh my God, they've heard me play so many times. If I don't play perfectly, yeah. But playing for people you know is a privilege, in that it's an opportunity to spend more time with your family.
Frank, I've known you for 15 years now. It seems like this theme of family extends to your friends. I've known you always to keep the type of open house, the open home, that people are always coming and going and feeling free to collaborate musically or just humanly.
It's true.
Is that something, was it always that way for you?
Well, my late wife was very warm and welcoming to people, and through my circles, people that I met at the orchestra, she invited everybody in to get to know me, and as a result, to get to know her. And our house has been a focal point of music, both rehearsing and concerts for many years. Concerts for one organization or another, you know, charities or benefits. And yes, I love that kind of life. As you know, you've spent time over in my place, and
beautiful garden.
Whoever comes over is staying for dinner, you know, that kind of thing. My kids always had a ton of friends during their school years. I continue to have pretty much an open door, and I love it, because I love people.
I only met your late wife, Lynette, once. Can you tell me about her and her influence on you musically and humanly?
First, I'll tell you how we met.
Yes.
We were both students at Tanglewood, and she was a bassoonist, a very fine bassoonist, and we both got placed in the Schubert Octet group, coaching. And I show up to this rehearsal with my clarinet and my motorcycle, which I had a little motor scooter at the time. And here was this absolutely gorgeous young woman who played beautifully. And I'm thinking, oh, she'd probably like a ride home, you know, to the dorm. And so I asked her that, and she thought I had a car. So we get to my motorcycle, and she says, well, how am I going to ride on this thing? Anyway, after that summer, we were inseparable. And she was a wonderful bassoonist and a wonderful mother. And she really is probably was the catalyst behind the home that brought people in. Because my childhood house of origin was not filled with people all the time. My parents were very nice and everything, but it was a small house, and you know, we did our own thing. We usually went out, hung out at other people's homes. But my wife had that ability to bring people into our lives. And so I think that's her greatest influence on me. We played chamber music together for many years at the Santa Fe Festival. As I said, she was a wonderful musician. And I miss her still.
It was fun.
Yes.